Hello and welcome to One Trek Mind with me, Raptor.
And me, Michael.
And today we are going to be going over Star Trek Discovery as a whole. Now that Season 5 is over, and that being the last season, now that the show is over, we thought it was the perfect time to sort of have a think back over the show as a whole and kind of just summarize our thoughts and feelings about it. Obviously, in the future, we will probably do a retrospective where we'll go back and look at all of the episodes again for all of the seasons, but that's going to probably be after we do all of the other shows first, and there is a long way to go before we get to that. So I thought now was a very good time to go over. So I thought we'd start by summarizing our thoughts about Season 5 as a whole, just to sort of remind us what we thought last week, and I shall let Michael go first.
For Season 5, I actually quite liked it. I thought overall the season was fun. It had a lot of standout, very Star Trek-y kind of moments that I feel the show wasn't necessarily missing before, but didn't have quite enough of. I do still think the show was a little too character-centric on Michael Burnham for like a final time, but they did allow other characters to shine. They gave a nice arc to Captain Raynor, or I guess Commander Raynor, since he is demoted. And in general, I really appreciate that they covered a very interesting topic, in my opinion. Again, going back to a Next Generation episode that basically got no follow-up or anything, even though it had huge implications for the universe. I was very glad to see that we did get to return to that and explore it just a little bit more. But ultimately, I do feel like that was not a complete wasted potential moment, but we didn't quite do as much with the progenitors as I was hoping for. But again, overall, I was pretty happy with it, and I still think it was one of the most solid endings to a Star Trek show that I've ever seen, because, well, to be frank, the Star Trek hasn't really done a great job on its endings throughout its tenure, and I did think this show actually managed to do a pretty good job.
Yeah, I would mostly agree. Season 5 was definitely the best of the 5 for me. I think there was quite a lot of good development in terms of how it told the story. It actually felt like things were happening. There are a lot of very Star Trek-y moments or Star Trek-y episodes. One or two that I didn't quite like as much as the rest, but you'll get that with any series of Star Trek. And the ending, I thought, was a very good ending. Thinking back on what I said last week about what is the best finale for a Star Trek show, I still don't think it was the best series finale. I stand by that, but it was a very good one and a very final one, and it felt like a good sort of end for the show as a whole. But yeah, I agree with you that I think it was a bit of a mistake for the whole progenitor thing to be wrapped up in one episode. I do agree that I still think they should have actually gotten to the progenitors in the second to last episode, so we would have had a bit more time with that. But yeah, apart from that, it was a very, very strong final season. With that in mind, I think it's good to look at the show as a whole now, and instead of just sort of parrot fashioning things we've said before about other seasons, I thought we'll go with a bit more of a fair sort of discussion and come up with some things we thought the show did very well and some things we think the show could have done better or did not do very well. I will go first, and I will say that one of the things this show did really well is sheer production value of it. Star Trek has never been exactly like high budget, maybe with the Abrams films, but no, for a prolonged TV or streaming, as I suppose we have to call it now, series, Discovery certainly demonstrated what Star Trek shows were going to look like from here on in. And regardless of whether I didn't like the artistic direction or styles they picked, I have to admit that the budget was always on screen.
100%. I mean, visual effects were always on point. The creature prosthetics and makeup were always quite good. Again, disregarding artistic tastes, like when it comes to like Klingons or something else, they were always very, very good looking. Specifically, Saru has always been a character I'm like, that is a really great looking, like, practical character.
I thought the tardigrade was particularly good as well in season 1.
All VFX as well, but yeah, the tardigrade did look quite good. I mean, again, almost all the creatures throughout the entire show, or alien races, or the effects on the Spore drive, or on really anything, like visually the show really shines, I think. Maybe, again, a few artistic directions that I didn't appreciate. There was some lighting choices throughout the series that I was not the biggest fan of, but there were some that I was a huge fan of.
I mean, you actually hit on something else that I think is worth mentioning there, that Discovery gave us quite a lot of alien life. We had the Gormengander, the tardigrade, those big eel things from the later seasons. Like, Star Trek shows generally do, I think, a pretty poor job of showing us the sort of animals that live around the galaxy as well. Like, apart from targs,
which again are just
dogs.
Yeah, they're were they dogs or were they pigs dressed up?
Kind of like
prosthetics?
A combination.
I mean, again, I get it. For shows that had a lower budget and everything, it's very difficult to do anything VFX-wise, and it's very difficult to put prosthetics on an animal, and one, make it look convincing, and two, get the animal to cooperate with that whole process. So I get it, why we didn't really see much in terms of alien life when it comes to animals until these newer Trek shows, starting with Discovery. But it has been very nice to see it play out. Again, I think artistically there were a couple decisions where I'm like, it looks very weird, but it's a little uninspired in terms of a couple other aspects, maybe the writing of it or its behavior, but visually it was always very nice to see something quite alien looking. I mean, in this latest season, I really liked the design on those weird bug looking predators that shot out the barbs on
the Trill like camouflage. Do you know what they remind me of? Now, having thought about it, they remind me of the Cazadors from Fallout New Vegas.
Oh, they do kind of look like that. Those evil little bastards. I'd never been poisoned to death so quickly by anything in my life. That was ridiculous.
What about you? Something you thought that Discovery did very well?
I think they did a very good job in terms of amping up the drama of things. There were, in some cases for the worse, in some cases for the better. One issue I had with a lot of legacy series was the lack of character conflict, or if it was there, it was usually resolved perhaps a little too quickly. And I do think Discovery did a good job kind of amping that up to a degree that made the show more exciting. There were occasionally moments where I think it faltered in that and it went too far with that interpersonal drama. But there were a lot of situations and storylines where I'm like, this either has a lot of really great potential or it actually did live up to that potential. Like, I personally really enjoyed Book kind of turning against Michael in season 4. Because, in my opinion, I think it makes a lot of sense. He lost his whole planet to this other species. He would want revenge and wouldn't just be super easily turned away from that. I really enjoyed, over the first 2 seasons, Michael trying to basically get good with all the rest of the crew after being a mutineer and going to prison for, I think it was half a year, and how people were genuinely uncomfortable around her, and she really had to earn their respect. And again, you can argue some flaws in terms of the writing with both of those things, but I think that is a very smart thing to do with a Star Trek show that a lot of Trek doesn't really capitalize on. I mean, at the end of the day, these shows, while being sci-fi, like, they're dramas. They're not really supposed to be action shows. They're not really tragedies or horrors, even though they touch on each of those genres in all of Trek. At the end of the day, it's a drama, and I think you should really showcase that drama, which this show 100% did.
I mean, as much as as the show has been lambasted for being too emotional, and in some respects I do agree with that, I think sometimes it was too emotional. On the other hand, we have both discussed how elements of Legacy Trek, where it's like, these are things that would require therapy to deal with. Captain Picard is a great example. You know, he comes back from the Borg, he has one episode where he goes off the rails slightly, and then after that he's perfectly fine, until the events of Star Trek First Contact, or every time he meets a Borg. Sometimes things in Legacy Trek are dealt with too easily. There's not any sort of long-running emotional sort of baggage for characters. And yeah, Discovery made a good attempt at trying to sort of do something with that. So yeah, I agree quite a lot with that one. So I think if we're going to talk about things that Discovery did very well, I think we do have to talk about season 2 and bringing in Pike and
creating a spin-off show that is probably both of our favorites of the current track.
Creating a really good spin-off show as a result. Thinking back to watching season 2, Pike coming in was such a breath of fresh air to the show. Almost on his own, just seemed to lift what had been up to that point quite a fairly dark, depressing sort of season 1.
Yeah, like I said, I appreciate the drama that they brought in between characters, but there was some drama elements more to do with the story as a whole that were just a little too intense. I'm like, okay, like, slow your roll just a little bit. Like, I would like some levity here, and Captain Pike brought that in spades. Like, he was an extremely charismatic character.
Great casting choice.
Anson Mount is really good as Captain Pike, and I appreciate that they didn't go for an accurate Captain Pike in that regard, because the original Captain Pike was not really like how Anson Mount plays him, and I'm perfectly fine with the change. Like,
yes, original Captain Pike was not old, but weary and grizzled, and kind of, what am I still doing here? I want to retire, misery, blah blah blah.
Quite sexist as well.
Female on the bridge. Whereas yes, Mount's Pike is overwhelmingly great. It was overwhelmingly great in season 2, and I'm so glad that they really went all in with the spin-off show as a result. But yeah, I mean, he was a great addition to season 2. We do have to give Discovery some credit for Strange New Worlds.
Absolutely. Piggybacking off of that, I would say another good quality of the show, which I'm sure some people would disagree with, but in my opinion, I think the show has some really great characters in it. I think Saru has been a fantastic character from beginning to end. I know some people have their issues with her, but I absolutely adore Tilly. I think she's a great character, and I've really enjoyed her arc of becoming a more capable leader, even though she still holds on to that really quirky awkwardness that I really appreciate. It does make me laugh quite a lot. I think Tarina was a great character that they brought in I think it was season 3 when they introduced her. Book, maybe a little middle of the road on Book, but I did enjoy him as a character. Stamets is one that grew on me quite a bit as the show went on. Who else do we have here?
Reno was one of my favorites. I just wish the show had done more with her.
Yeah, a very underutilized character, but a very fun one. Every time she was around, you know, you were in for a good time.
She reminds me of she has the sort of attitude of Bones McCoy, but as an engineer instead of a doctor.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you kind of need to have your slightly grumpy character who kind of counters some of the other ones, or in some cases clashes with the other ones. I really enjoyed when Stamets and Rena were basically not the same character, but both very stubborn, very grumpy people, and when they were put in the same room together, it created a lot of very fun conflict to watch unfold, and then they came to enjoy each other's company as time went on. Yeah, character work, though. I think they did do a rather good job with their characters in the show. Again, there are some that I think they definitely faltered on, but a lot of the main cast I really enjoyed. Acting-wise as well, I think the actors were really giving it their all, like throughout the entirety of the show, like every single one of them. Even for the characters that weren't as well written or got as good a material, I think they were all doing as good a job as they possibly could have. But in all fairness, we should probably move on to our negatives and what we think the show definitely could have improved on.
This is going to be one that I think is an overwhelmingly negative thing, and rather than a thing that the show could have improved on. I'm going to call it the MacGuffin problem, even though they're not using the word strictly in the right context, but I think it's the best context to use here. And what I mean by this is that every series has had some great big galactic level problem that the crew of the Discovery must almost single-handedly solve in some way, usually by finding a MacGuffin or finding a person who is a MacGuffin or finding out something which is basically a MacGuffin.
True.
Season 2 was all about the Red Angel that turned out to be Michael Burnham.
And then Control. Control, I think, was the bigger issue there. The Red Angel was the MacGuffin. Control was the universal
galactic
ending threat that was impossible to defeat, and etc., etc.
Season 3 was all about the Burn and finding that the Burn galactic troublesome event was solely the responsible of one individual. Season 4 was all about the great planet destroying phenomenon which turned out to be controlled by a species on the edge of the galaxy, and Season 5 was about an all-powerful god machine MacGuffin, which they had to find before the bad guys do. It's not a problem that I think is solely Discovery's problem.
And it is becoming a streaming issue. Not even a streaming issue, but a media issue.
It's an issue with all sorts of TV shows and all sorts of films. Certainly was a problem with Abrams' Star Trek films. I would argue was definitely an issue with Star Trek Nemesis. Not so much, great galactic ending event, but certainly here's my big badass spaceship with big green radiation thing which can kill everything, and my big ass spaceship has like so many shields and can fire through cloak and is just so wonderful, you guys.
I mean, they even have the same issue in like Marvel movies, or not even just Marvel, but superhero movies will fall into that problem quite a bit on a slightly smaller scale, but similar stakes. Like you have shows like The Walking Dead that would do the same thing. I mean, Game of Thrones basically did the same thing. There's a lot of media, especially nowadays, since there is so much media that already exists, that just has to amp up the stakes a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. And now we've hit a point where so many things are like, yep, all life as we know it will be gone, so we had better defeat the threat. And that just completely removes a lot of the tension with it, because you're like, well, obviously they're not going to wipe out all life on this show. Like, I know they're gonna have to come up with a way to beat it, so I'm not really that invested in it anymore. If they found a way to shrink the stakes a little bit, I think a lot of that tension would return, where you're like, they could actually do this. Like, even if it was, let's wipe out all life on this one planet, that's something feasibly doable, where it's like, you could do that. This actually could occur. But they do that kind of willy-nilly at this point in a lot of shows and movies. Discovery itself has had, I don't know if it's had multiple situations, but I guess specifically with Quajon, like they just said, all right, they're all dead. Whole planet's destroyed, all gone. And you're just like, oh, okay, so the threat is high, but obviously we're going to stop this problem if the threat is that high.
Yeah, I do kind of miss the days where Star Trek was able just to be like, here's a possible environmental problem with warp drive that's been shown by just this really random anomaly that's in the middle of space and is kind of a threat to people, but it's not like directly a threat to people, and let's investigate this and do an episode on something like that. So many Star Trek shows of the past and good episodes of Star Trek of the past didn't require the destruction of planets or huge galactic scale events. They were smaller scale, but just as important and interesting. I mean, the progenitor thing itself comes from one really good small scale episode, which again didn't need the Breen with super massive dreadnoughts and everything else.
Something else I think the show definitely suffers from is pacing. It was one issue I didn't find in season 5, which I was really thankful for.
It was all right.
Yeah, but most of the time the seasons feel very dragged out. Like, we could have definitely done this storyline within maybe 6 episodes at most, but we stretched it out to the point where you're just kind of begging the show to get on with it a lot of the time. You're like, oh my god, please. We've gone round and round in circles with this problem this entire time. Get to the point already. And that's not to say that there's not good episodes within that. Like, season 4 was my second favorite of the seasons, and it had quite a few episodes that would deviate away from like the big issue of the DMA. I think that's what it was called.
It was, yeah.
And just focus on something smaller scale, and I really liked the episode, but as a season it would drag the pacing down once again, because it's like, shouldn't we be focusing like more on the main problem here? Like, why are we sidestepping it so much? I think season 2 really had that issue, because it didn't seem like the show knew what it wanted to do. Like, the first, I don't know, like 4 or 5 episodes, it was all about the Red Angel and that being a potential threat, and then it shifted really suddenly to Control, and then that was a really big threat, and then it would shift back and forth between the two things, and then occasionally do like a standalone episode that didn't really have anything to do with either. It just felt like it was kind of all over the place until I think it was like the last 2 episodes where they're like, oh no, all these things combine. It's all part of this bigger plan, and it just felt really jumbled and weird, and the pacing was just all off. I think that is honestly probably my biggest criticism with the show as a whole, is its pacing was just really off sometimes, to the point of like turning me off and not wanting to watch anymore. But obviously we did. It wasn't enough of an issue for me to not watch it altogether, but it was definitely a big issue for me.
Something I think they could have, or they didn't utilize enough, definitely the Klingon Federation War. They made the decision to start the show with this conflict, a conflict which is not hardcore canon, but, you know, with the role-playing FASA books and with the fan projects like Axanar, the 4 years is, you know, generally referring to it as the 4 years war between the Klingons and the Federation. It's kind of sort of that, it's the fan base knows about it, you know. So to start the show there and then kind of badly detail this conflict, and then basically at the end of season 1 go, here's a 9-month time jump because we can't be asked to actually do this thing properly, and we're just going to go, whoop, there we go, everything's gone bad for the Federation and we're on the verge of losing the war, but Discovery's going to come and save the day last minute, and then the season 2 starts and all is fine. The Klingons have just gone back home and given up all the planets they took. They just really badly detailed the conflict, and it's disappointing, because the last time we got a proper conflict like this, the Dominion War, turned what was a show that was kind of struggling a bit into one of the best Star Trek shows of all time.
Yeah.
Sort of attached to that, they did the 4 Years War badly, is kind of all the other minor niggly things that we don't like the redesign of the Klingons that they did for no reason whatsoever, the artistic design they took with a lot of the ships, especially the Klingon ones, but also the Federation ones, the uniforms, they just did a really poor job. That being season 1, certainly on top of all of the other issues, was certainly not helpful to get people to continue watching.
It did spawn a very good episode, though, in the spin-off Strange New Worlds. I really enjoyed the episode about Umbenga and Chapel while they're fighting on the moon of, I think it's Jagal is what it was called. But again, it's like, if we had done something more like this, where it's a war show that we really focus on how this is like breaking the characters down and how difficult of a conflict this is, and really prolong that aspect of it, I think season 1 could have been really, really good. But they instead focused on a lot of like other random stuff, or in the cases when they would focus in on it, they would focus more on the fact that Discovery has the Spore drive, so it's naturally going to do better than everything else because it can just pop around the battlefield so easily. And it's like, it's just not as exciting or as engaging as what they could have done with that storyline. Again, just a lot of missed potential with that whole first season. I think the other major issue with the show is that it was so centric on like one or two characters at a time. I appreciate that they tried to do something different and say, okay, we've done Star Trek with an ensemble cast and given everyone like a moment to shine before. This time we're gonna really hone in on Michael Burnham as the main character, and occasionally we'll focus in on like Saru or Book, or in like early seasons you had Lorca or Giorgio. But more often than not, it was like, this is the Michael Burnham show. And as much as I do like her as a character, I think that was a poor decision given how unpopular she was with so many fans. In some cases, rightfully, and in some cases, in like really stupid reasons. And it was just frustrating that there were so many characters that I wanted to get to know and just never really got a chance to. Like Owoshikun and Detmer just never really
in season 5.
I still don't get that either. I really wonder what happened with that. Like, those were two characters that very occasionally would get like something to do, and it would really interest me in their characters, and then they would just kind of wash them aside for a very prolonged period of time to focus on Michael, Book, or Saru. And it's just like, can I please get something with these characters, please? Like, again, I feel like if the show was entirely different and didn't take place on a Starfleet vessel, that could work to focus in on just like a very small handful of characters. But it did, so a majority of the bridge crew just felt like completely, I don't want to say one-dimensional, because they did eventually gain some layers to their characters, but there's just so much unknown about them. Whereas really any other Star Trek show is like, no, we're going to give them an episode where you get to learn more about them and see like their own little arcs that they're going to go on. And we did sort of get that in Discovery, but in very fleeting moments, very, very sparsely. And I think that did hurt the show as a whole.
I'm pretty sure we could come up with 5 things, like 5 facts about every single crew member on Voyager per se, things we know from the show. But I would seriously struggle to even come up with 2 or 3 for most of the cast of Discovery, because they just haven't had the opportunity to do anything.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases I couldn't even come up with 1.
No.
So, yeah, that's an area I think the show very, very much struggled.
Yeah, I do completely agree with you about the focus solely on Michael Burnham. I still don't like her as a character. She has definitely gotten better. Thinking about season 1 to season 5, definitely improved, but I still just can't gel with her. I still think she comes off as incredibly arrogant sometimes. The fact that she persistently puts herself into harm's way as the most superior officer of her starship and treats it like nothing. I mean, I wouldn't mind the show being about her if every time something happened on, that it wasn't always her having and going and doing it. Like almost every away team, almost every serious event always had her there, or was, to her. And it just gets kind of ridiculous after a point. How many layers of plot armor does this character have?
Yeah.
But no, she definitely improved. The time jump to the 32nd century, which I'm putting in here because I don't know whether I would put it as a pro or a negative. In some respects, I think the show should have started here. That's where season 1 should have started. The 32nd century. Start with a prologue explaining the burn has happened, everything's gone to shit, and start there. You can have your Spore drive and it'd be fine because it's just, futuristic technology designed at this point in time to counteract the fact that, the issue of the burn. You can have all your fancy looking bridge displays that don't really suit the 22nd, 23rd century, but do more relate to something of the 32nd century. You can have your radically different uniform design and it not kind of interfere with the canon too much. You can do all these things and it'd be perfectly fine. And it's more interesting as well because...
Maybe not the Klingons. I still wouldn't have liked that change.
Well, obviously not the Klingons, but you get what I mean. You set it in the 32nd century to begin with, and you can do whatever the fuck you like with the canon, because there is no canon of the 32nd century.
Yep, you can just do what you want with the technology, with the characters, with Starfleet, Federation. You can literally do whatever you want.
And if season 1 had been about discovering the cause of the burn, yes, it wasn't a particularly good season, but it was probably better than season 1 of the actual show.
Yeah, I think so.
I just think it would have been better to start with the 32nd century. That being said, I do not like the 32nd century aesthetic at all. The design of the starships primarily, they are... James May off Top Gear has a word, gopping. James May's word, gopping, for something that is so ugly, it's just... Ugh. And there are some ships from the 32nd century that are really...
Most of the aesthetics in the 32nd century, I'm not the biggest fan of, because it's like a weird blend of like really generic, super high tech, where it's like, oh, everything moves a lot, like everything is magnetic and doesn't actually touch one another, which I find to be, at this point, just kind of stereotypical and boring. But it also had a very, like, minimalist look to things.
Apple
where
shop feel.
Yeah, it's just like everything's going to be super smooth and not have too many designs on it or anything. And I'm just like, just looks kind of boring, man. Like, I would like to see a little bit more. Again, I don't think any ship in the 32nd century looked better than any ship from earlier canon. Like I would put the Defiant, the Voyager, any version of the Enterprise, well actually minus the Enterprise J, I think it's J, that ugly monstrosity of a ship. Every single one of them I would say looks better than the ships we got in the 32nd century. I do think the ship Discovery looked better than all the other ones that they came across, personally. But even then, I didn't like the look of it all that much either. Again, just the concept of nacelles that are not attached to your ship just seems like a terrible idea. I don't like that decision.
Actually, that is something else I think that the show didn't do quite as well as it could have, is the hero ship in itself. Discovery is not a nice looking ship. Its proportions are a little off. I think it's the nacelles. They are way too long.
Some long nacelles. She got some long legs.
Way too long. And although I know it doesn't sort of bother you, it does bother me knowing that this is a design that has basically been taken from, concepts from the Planet of the Titans project. It does bug me a little that they couldn't come up with anything new. They've taken this from something else and then made it kind of hideous.
I mean, I personally think it looks better than the original concept design. I was not a fan of how bulky that ship looked.
Would agree that it's better than the original concept, but that is still not saying very much.
Yeah, I mean, I would have preferred if they had taken a ship that has already existed in canon. I'd be fine with that. Just one that we haven't seen too much of, like put them all on an Akira class, or what's another good one?
I mean, from that time period, we don't actually have that many canonical designs anyway, because it's a time period that hasn't really been represented before. You've got things like the Constitution class, and that's basically about it for on-screen. You've got sort of off-screen canonical ones like the Saladin and Hermes types, which were single nacelle ships.
Well, that's why I think the Akira class would have been a good choice, just because I mean, maybe not call it the Akira, because I don't think canon-wise it had been created yet. But you have the original Enterprise that was an inverted Akira. So I'm like, just do something based off of that. Like, that was a nice looking ship. And I think it would have looked a lot better than what we had here. You could do like a Miranda class.
Yeah.
I like the Miranda, personally.
And when you see the Discovery next to, say, the Shenzhou or even the Enterprise that shows up in Season 2, it's night and day. The look. Like, that's a really nice looking Enterprise. That's not a nice looking ship at all.
And I still don't dislike Discovery. In its first 2 seasons, the look of Discovery, I was fine with it. Wasn't my favorite, but it was fine. But I did prefer the other ships. Honestly, I wish we had stayed on the Shinzo. Like that, I thought that ship looked pretty nice. It's a nice compact little ship.
I like the little Walker class. I want to talk about one other thing, which again, I don't know whether I put it as a pro or a con, before I ask you an interesting question that I think will bookend this discussion. The Spore drive. As a concept,
I don't like it.
I'm so glad. I cannot stand it. Look, Star Trek has had its mumbo-jumbo propulsion systems for ages. You know, the original series had ion drive, and then we had transwarp drive, which stuck around for a long time, and then Voyager introduced quantum slipstream. And even the new, the animated show Prodigy came up with the protostar in its next generation stellar drive, I think it is, or something. But they all felt relatively similar to each other. They weren't really changing that much. Quantum slipstream was basically the same as Borg transwarp, essentially.
They were just improving on what had come before. The Spore drive just kind of comes out of nowhere. You're like, you can teleport? I'm sorry,
basically, instantaneous teleportation across fungal fibers that cover the entirety of everything that you access through mushroom spores. And I'm just like, and then on top of it all, in order to activate the drive, you have to have spinny things, and then the ship has to spin as well. And
I still like the spin. The spin is like the one aspect of it. I'm like, that does look kind of cool. I see why they were like, we gotta make it spin.
It's just so childish. And
it's better than if it just disappeared. At that point, I'd be like, okay, so Battlestar Galactica, you just took that from there.
Well,
that at least gave it a unique look with the spin.
And I think one of the main things I don't like about the Spore drive is that it removed the idea that the galaxy was a big place and that you actually had to travel somewhere. So many of the sort of the parts of the original shows, the legacy shows, were, and even Strange New Worlds has gone back to doing this, and so has Lower Decks, is that we know the ship is going somewhere or has to go somewhere. So while they're on the way, we have the characters discussing things, we have the characters planning, we have things put in motion, preparations made.
Here we have them doing that before, then they teleport, and then they do the thing. Or they have their weird conversations while they're there.
They just teleport straight in without even checking. I mean, Season 5, they teleport into this location and almost end up being sucked into a black hole, for God's sake. Season 1, they teleport and almost end up burning into a star. How are you ever supposed to check where you're going if you're going to be there literally instantaneously? And even in Stargate, they send a bloody probe or a drone through first to check that it's okay to go somewhere before you actually go there.
Maybe there's a line in the show where they say they do the same thing, but I don't think they ever have. Yeah, I mostly just dislike it because it is kind of a problem with a lot of media where travel time is just completely negated. Here, at least, it's given a reason. It's like, well, we can teleport, so naturally we can just appear where we need to appear. But it is a major problem, especially with like later seasons of Game of Thrones and like tons and tons of other shows where it's like, okay, we've established that it takes like 3 days to get from here to there. And now all of a sudden characters are able to just be there because the plot needs them to be there right now. And it's just a very lazy approach that I don't really like. And it removes a lot of the like the complexity of certain things. It's like, oh, well, we need to get here, but we don't have enough time. So we have to come up with this new plan, do this thing, and it just makes it more interesting, more tense. You wonder, like, are the characters going to make it in time? And they do that in Discovery with other ships, where it's like, okay, you can't get support because you teleported in. All the rest of them have to use warp, and it's going to take them a minute. So it's not like they completely removed that aspect. But it would be nice if they didn't have that as a constant scapegoat for the crew of Discovery, to be like, well, there's no way we could survive this situation, but thankfully we have a teleportation spore drive. And it's like, well, obviously you're going to be the center of attention and win every single battle because, yeah, you can fucking teleport wherever you need to. It just makes it less interesting.
I also seriously doubt the effectiveness of this technology, even from the position of, we built this in order to be the ultimate weapon against the Klingons in the war. It's on 2 ships, and they're not even warships, they're on 2 science ships. So what are you going to do? You're going to beam your ship, transport it immediately to the Klingon fleet, which could be 10, 15, 20 starships. Yeah, you've got your instant teleportation device. You might catch a couple by surprise. But after that, they're going to blow you out of the sky. Doesn't matter how good you are. So the idea that this is, the ultimate Federation secret weapon, it just seems unlikely to really achieve what Starfleet want it to. So yeah, Spore Drive, not a big fan of. We come to the question that I sort of had specifically for you, because you are new to the Star Trek fandom. I got you into this. What would your opinion of Star Trek as a franchise had been if Discovery was your first show? So if you'd never seen the legacy stuff, do you think your opinion of Discovery would be more positive, less positive, and your opinion of Star Trek as a whole? What do you think? How different do you think your opinions would be if Discovery was all you had seen?
I think if it was the first thing I had saw, I think it would have drastically improved my opinion of this show. I still would have had issues with a lot of the writing in the first 2 seasons in particular, but I wouldn't have had nearly as many issues with things like canon or altering this for the sake of this plot point kind of stuff. I think I would have liked the show a lot more if I hadn't seen any of the rest of it, but I don't think it would have hooked me in the way the legacy shows did. So I don't think I would have been as eager to continue watching all the rest of Star Trek if this is where I had started. That being said, I probably still would have. I think you wouldn't have not let me only watch this. But I think it would have potentially tainted the other shows, because again, I would have been like, where's all the conflict? Like, why is everyone like so okay with each other all the time? And where are the bigger stakes? Why aren't characters dying? Like, I think it would have negatively impacted my experience with it all. And I can't say that's true of all the new Trek, because I have a roommate actually who his introduction to Star Trek was Strange New Worlds, and that got him like very excited to watch more of it, and he has since watched a whole lot more of it, including the legacy shows and everything. I think Discovery might be the only one he hasn't given a try yet, actually. But he got started on Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks, and very much enjoyed both of them and wanted to keep going. But if I had started with Discovery, I don't know if I would have been as eager to see all the rest of it. But I do think it would have made me enjoy the show on its own a lot more.
Do you think that's the reason why there sometimes feels there's such a big gulf in sort of thinking about the fan base between sort of the fans who watched the legacy shows and then watched Discovery, and the newer block of fans who have come in with Discovery and everything since?
I 100% think so. I think Discovery was really, I don't want to say capitalizing, but I think they really went with that idea that I remember Abrams saying he wanted to get a new crowd of people into Star Trek with his movies, and I don't think he really succeeded in doing that. Whereas I think Discovery did succeed in doing that, where they're like, let's really shake things up here and get different kinds of people watching this. And I think it worked. Like, I know a lot of people who have never seen any Star Trek, only Discovery, and they absolutely adore it. They think it's a fantastic show. But I don't think they would particularly like the legacy shows or a lot of other Star Trek. So I don't think it succeeds in getting people into the franchise. I think it only succeeded in getting people into that show. And I think that is definitely why there is such a disparity between the opinions of legacy fans versus brand new fans. And like I said, I still probably would have had a lot of issues with season 2 in particular. I think a lot of the writing in that season was just not good. I was not a fan.
Season 2 and 3, I think, for me, were the worst in terms of their writing. I don't know how, if Discovery had been where I started with Star Trek, I don't know what my opinion would be, because Star Trek has been a part of my basically entire life. So it's hard for me to try to imagine not having all of the experience before. I don't think my opinions of the show would be too different. I mean, on obviously the sort of the canon issues and the art direction issues and stuff wouldn't be there. But I think the fundamental sort of bare bones of the show, the focus too heavily on one character, the ramping up of stakes to almost meaningless natures, the sort of MacGuffin feel of a lot of the storylines, and the sort of bad writing. I definitely don't think I would have been tempted to try more Star Trek having watched Discovery. That's for sure. So let us know down in the comments what your overall opinion of Discovery as a show is. Please do keep the comments relatively civil. We know that Discovery does bring out some very passionate, emotional opinions from people, but let's try and keep the discussion relatively civil and balanced. But let us know what you thought about the season 5. Let us know what you think about Discovery as a whole. What do you think it did well? What do you think it did not do so well? And yeah, we will see you in the next video, and we'll be back to something a little less restricted to one show. We're not sure what the next sort of videos may be. I think we might just do a few sort of random sort of things for a little bit, since I'll be honest, doing weekly reviews of the show has been kind of painful.
And yeah, it's difficult to be so on time with it every single week, doing the same thing so many times in a row. I feel that pain on my channel as well, where you're just like, oh god, this is kind of stressful.
Might take a little bit of a rest and do some shorter, more snappy, less in-depth videos. But yeah, until then, it is goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.